I wasn't invited to my sister's wedding. Mom said, "It's best if you don't come." So I went on vacation. On her big day, while my fiancé and I were sailing a seven-star yacht in the Caribbean, we saw the bride crying, guests panicking. All on the live stream, my family kept calling 110 missed calls. You heard that right. 110 missed calls from my mother, father, and even my aunt, all flooding my phone while I was sipping a glass of the finest French wine, watching a disaster unfold 5,000 miles away. The bride, my own sister, was absolutely melting down on a live stream feed meant to celebrate her perfect day. People were scrambling, looking terrified, and I was sitting there, a cool breeze on my face, the Caribbean sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, feeling nothing but a grim sort of justice. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Who does that? Who watches their own sister's wedding fall apart and feels vindicated? I need you to hear the whole story, the years of pain, the manipulation, and the pure, cold betrayal that led to that moment. After you hear it all, you tell me, was I wrong for letting them deal with the consequences of their own cruelty? Or was this seven-star vacation the karma they truly deserved? The story doesn't start on a yacht. It starts 10 years ago, long before I even met my incredible fiancé, Alex. It starts with two sisters, growing up in a house where one was always the sun and the other, well, I was the shadow. My sister, Clara, was the golden child. She was naturally beautiful, effortlessly charming, and had this magnetic personality that drew everyone in, especially our parents. I was always the quieter, more academically focused one. I got straight A's, won scholarships, and was generally self-sufficient, but in my parents' eyes, that meant I was fine. And Clara needed all the attention and resources because she was sensitive or fragile. This favoritism wasn't subtle. It was the air we breathed. If I bought a designer dress, they'd ask if it was too extravagant, given my student loans, even though I paid for everything myself. If Clara bought the exact same dress, they'd gush about how beautiful she looked and offer to pay for it. The emotional neglect was a constant, low-grade fever in my life, and I learned early on that the only way to survive was to become fiercely independent and stop expecting anything from them. I poured all my energy into my career. I worked 3 jobs through university, graduated top of my class, and started my own tech consultancy, which by my late 20s was wildly successful. I had everything I had earned, and I was proud of that. But my parents never once truly acknowledged my success. They'd bring up Clara's latest achievement, a promotion at her entry-level marketing job, at every family dinner, and my accomplishments were relegated to an awkward footnote. The dynamic escalated drastically when I met Alex. He's an absolute dream, kind, brilliant, and incredibly successful in his own right, heading up a major investment firm. We fell head over heels, and within a year, he proposed with a ring that was absolutely stunning, a family heirloom that must have cost more than my parents' house. This, somehow, was the final straw for Clara. She couldn't stand that I had landed a partner who wasn't just successful, but genuinely adored me. Her own fiancé, a man named Jeremy, was a perfectly nice guy, but he was struggling to launch his own small business, and financially, they were nowhere near where Alex and I were. From the moment I announced my engagement, Clara began subtly sabotaging me. She'd constantly make passive-aggressive comments about how ostentatious our wedding plans were going to be, even though we hadn't planned anything yet. She'd lament to our mother about how her own wedding would have to be small and modest, and my parents, of course, took her side, pitying her for her bad luck. Then came the announcement that would put everything into motion. Clara and Jeremy decided to get married, and they picked a date that was exactly 2 months before the date Alex and I had tentatively set for our own wedding. Our wedding was going to be a large destination affair in Italy, and their initial plan was a small, local ceremony. I was genuinely happy for her, or at least I tried to be. I immediately offered to pay for her dress, her catering, anything she needed, just as a gesture of goodwill, a way to try and bridge the gap. I even offered to push our date back a full year so their celebration could have the family's undivided attention. But Clara didn't want goodwill, she wanted the spotlight. She rejected all my offers, but then, a few weeks later, she announced a massive, immediate change of plans. She was having a huge, lavish wedding at the most expensive venue in our city. The same venue my mother had always dreamt of for me. And the cost, it was astronomical, far beyond their means. It became clear very quickly where the money was coming from. My parents, in a move that still makes my blood boil, decided to use the entire savings fund they had supposedly been keeping for my future wedding. Money that was meant to be split between us, even though I'd never expected or asked for it, to bankroll Clara's sudden, extravagant affair. They told me without a hint of remorse, Clara needs this more than you do. You're already so successful, and Alex can easily pay for everything. This is Clara's one chance to have a fairy tale. I was stunned. It wasn't about the money, which was a drop in the bucket compared to what Alex and I made. It was the outright declaration that my sister's happiness and perceived need were inherently more important than mine. The next thing that happened cemented my decision. When the formal invitations went out, mine never arrived. I waited, thinking it was a mistake. I waited 2 weeks. Finally, I called my mother. Her tone was flat, almost rehearsed. "Oh, honey," she said, about the wedding. "Clara and Jeremy have decided to keep the guest list very, very intimate. Just immediate family and a few close friends." I pointed out that I was her immediate family, her only sister. That's when she delivered the line that became the title of this story. She sighed dramatically and said, "It's best if you don't come, dear. Clara is already feeling so much pressure, and with you and Alex being, well, so successful and having such big plans, she worries you'll accidentally upstage her. It's just a lot easier for everyone if you celebrate from a distance." They literally uninvited me from my only sister's wedding because they were afraid my existence, my success, and my fiancé would overshadow the golden child. It was a calculated, deliberate act of emotional exclusion. My father later called not to apologize, but to echo my mother's sentiment, emphasizing that my presence was too distracting. They didn't even ask Alex. They just wiped me off the map. That phone call, that simple, brutal dismissal, was the moment the final cord snapped. For years, I had held on to a sliver of hope that they would eventually see me, acknowledge my worth, and treat me as an equal. That hope died right there. I hung up the phone and walked straight into Alex's study. I was trembling, but not with sadness. I was shaking with a cold, clear resolve. I explained everything to him, and bless his heart, Alex didn't hesitate. He knew the pain they had inflicted over the years. He just looked at me and said, "They want to pretend you don't exist. Fine. Let's make sure they remember exactly what they're missing." He walked over to his laptop, opened a website, and looked at me with a smirk. "Italy can wait. We're going to the Caribbean, and we're going to do it in style." Within 48 hours, Alex had chartered a private jet and secured the most luxurious 7-star mega-yacht available for a 2-week cruise through the Grenadines, St. Lucia, and the rest of the Lesser Antilles, scheduled to depart the day before Clara's wedding. This wasn't just a vacation, it was my declaration of independence. It was a massive, silent no to their years of mistreatment. We weren't just going on a trip. We were creating an experience so profoundly extravagant and undeniably joyful that it would stand in stark, beautiful contrast to the emotional void they had tried to create for me. Every detail was over the top, from the personal chef who specialized in Michelin star cuisine to the onboard masseuse and the crew that catered to our every whim. We decided we weren't going to hide it. We were going to live it up and share just enough of our paradise on social media to let them know exactly what I was doing instead of attending their emotionally bankrupt ceremony. The days leading up to the departure were a blur of perfect, unapologetic indulgence. Meanwhile, my parents and Clara were buzzing with self-importance over the impending society event. They were trying to stage, they didn't mention my name once. They assumed I would be home, quietly brooding, or maybe watching the live stream of their perfect day with a box of tissues. They clearly hadn't considered that I had the means and the desire to create my own spectacular reality. As we boarded the yacht, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I knew I was doing the right thing for my mental health, finally putting an impermeable boundary between myself and their toxicity. The yacht itself was breathtaking, a floating palace. Our suite had 270-degree ocean views, and the private deck was bigger than my old apartment. Alex and I were ecstatic. We spent the first full day of the trip just relaxing, exploring, and truly disconnecting. I almost forgot about the wedding entirely. So that's the situation I was in. I was sailing on a yacht that costs more to run for a week than Clara's entire wedding budget. All because my family uninvited me out of fear of being upstaged. They chose to prioritize their golden child's insecurity over my right to be at my own sister's wedding, and the wedding day was rapidly approaching. Before I tell you what happened next, the part where I was drinking champagne and watching utter chaos unfold, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have quietly gone to a simple spa retreat? Would you have confronted them one last time? Or would you have gone full eat the rich vacation and made sure they saw you living your absolute best life? Let me know your gut reaction, because what I did next was completely unplanned, but absolutely spectacular. The morning of the wedding, I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and the gentle rocking of the boat. We were anchored in a secluded cove off the coast of St. Bart's. It was pure bliss. I had totally blocked the wedding from my mind, but Alex, ever the astute observer, brought it up over breakfast. "It's D-Day, my love," he said, handing me a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. "Think we should check in on the drama." I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to keep the peace and just enjoy my vacation. The other part, the part that had been hurt and dismissed for 25 years, was morbidly curious. Clara, being a millennial, had naturally hired a professional crew to livestream the entire ceremony and reception for distant relatives and, apparently, uninvited sisters. I found the link easily on my cousin's social media page. I clicked it, mostly expecting to see a beautiful, boring, over-the-top ceremony. What I saw was an absolute circus. I logged on just as the reception was supposed to be starting. The feed showed the inside of the opulent ballroom, which was eerily quiet. There were perhaps 10 people milling around, looking incredibly distressed. The camera zoomed in slightly, and I saw my mother clutching my father's arm, her face white as a sheet, whispering frantically into his ear. A few minutes later, the main doors burst open, and in strode Clara, but she wasn't walking in to the cheers of her guests. She was being practically dragged in by 2 of her bridesmaids, who looked absolutely panicked. Clara was already in her wedding dress, but the gown was ripped near the hem, and her beautiful updo was coming undone. But the real showstopper, she was sobbing, not gentle, teary-eyed sobbing, but a full, blown, body-shaking wail. She looked completely undone, her mascara running down her face. She was screaming something incoherent at Jeremy, her new husband, who was standing frozen by the head table, looking completely defeated. The guests, those who hadn't already left, began gathering their things in a quiet panic. It was a complete and total meltdown, all broadcast live in high definition. Alex and I exchanged a look of bewildered shock. "What in the world is happening?" I whispered. Then the calls started. My phone, which had been silent for days, suddenly erupted. The screen lit up with Mom, Dad, Aunt Carol, flashing repeatedly. I silenced the ringer, but kept watching the screen, which, over the course of the next hour, accumulated an astounding 110 missed calls. They weren't calling to say the cake is delicious. They were calling in desperation. On the live stream, a frantic conversation between my mother and a bridesmaid was picked up by a nearby mic. My mother was saying in a high high-pitched hysterical whisper, the caterer. He's gone. He never showed up. The ovens, they broke. The band just walked out. It's a disaster, Martha. It's all a complete disaster. The full, chaotic picture began to form. Apparently, in her haste to secure the most expensive everything, Clara had been cutting corners and using cheaper, unvetted vendors. The main caterer, who was supposed to be the highlight, never arrived because he was a known scam artist who took the deposit and vanished. The backup plan, a less than reputable second caterer, had a massive equipment failure, and his team walked out. The band, having not been fully paid up front as their contract stipulated, also packed up and left. The whole event was collapsing in a spectacular, expensive fashion. Clara, who was already emotionally fragile and obsessed with perfection, could not handle the public embarrassment. Her screaming match with Jeremy was apparently because he had warned her about using these shady vendors, and now she was blaming him for the catastrophe. My parents, who had sunk all their savings and perhaps more into this event, were completely helpless, watching their investment literally dissolve into a pile of tears and cold canapés. I put my phone down on the table, still flashing with missed calls, and looked at Alex. He didn't say, "You should call them." He didn't say, "This is awful." He just raised an eyebrow and smiled. "Well," he said, taking a long sip of his own wine, "it seems their perfect fairy tale needed a bit of a reality check. Shall we move on to the next island?" And that's exactly what we did. I muted the live stream. It had become too painful to watch my sister's humiliation, even if she deserved the karma, and I left the calls unanswered. I didn't want to gloat. I just wanted to continue enjoying the beautiful, peaceful reality I had created for myself, away from their drama. I knew what those calls were about. They weren't calling to check on me. They were calling because I was the only successful person in the family who could potentially swoop in and solve the problem. They expected me, the uninvited shadow, to use my resources, my network, and my fiancé's immense connections to salvage their disaster. They wanted me to be their scapegoat and their savior all at once. For the first time in my life, I refused to play that role. The aftermath was exactly as expected. When I finally called my parents back 2 days later, when the yacht was pulling into port in St. Lucia, my mother was sobbing uncontrollably. The wedding was an unmitigated disaster. The final cost, factoring in all the canceled contracts and last-minute attempts to fix things, was more than double the initial budget. They were financially ruined, and Clara and Jeremy's marriage had started off on the worst possible footing. The first thing my mother said, after a few minutes of dramatic wailing, was, "Why didn't you answer, sweetie? We needed you. You could have called your corporate friends. You could have wired us some money to get a last-minute replacement caterer." I kept my voice calm but firm. "Mom," I said, "I was on vacation. A vacation I took because you told me it was best if I didn't come to the wedding. You uninvited me. You made it explicitly clear that my presence was not wanted or necessary. Why would you assume that I would drop everything to save an event I wasn't even allowed to attend?" She had no answer. She immediately pivoted to guilt and manipulation. "But we're family. You have to help us. We've used up all our savings, and we have nothing left." "That," I replied, my voice stone cold, "was a choice you made. You chose to spend the entire wedding fund that was meant to be shared, and you chose to exclude me. Those were your decisions, and those are your consequences. I am deeply sorry for Clara's distress, but I have no obligation to fix a disaster that was, frankly, an entirely foreseeable outcome of years of unfair treatment and, ultimately, this choice of exclusion." The call ended with a furious hang up from my father, who called me a heartless, spoiled brat, but I felt zero guilt. I hung up the phone, put on my sunglasses, and joined Alex on the deck for a perfect sunset dinner. We got married 6 months later in a stunning, low-key, beautiful ceremony in Italy, just as planned. We invited my parents and Clara. They showed up, subdued and awkward, but they were there, and for the first time, they were guests in my world, not controllers of it. Clara and Jeremy, however, filed for divorce 18 months after their catastrophic wedding. unable to recover from the debt and the explosive start to their marriage. My parents learned a hard lesson in where their priorities should have always been. I maintain a strictly polite, transactional relationship with them now. My life is beautiful, peaceful, and utterly free of their toxic favoritism. I got my closure, my revenge, and my peace, all while sailing on a 7-star yacht. So that's the whole story. I got 110 missed calls while watching my sister's wedding implode on a livestream from the deck of a private yacht, and I never picked up. Do you think I was wrong to prioritize my own peace and happiness after years of being treated like a second-class daughter? Or was this the perfect, luxurious slice of karma? Like this video if you were on my side. Subscribe for more stories like this where I unpack the absolute worst of family drama. And share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Tell me if I was the villain or the justified queen of the high seas. I'll see you all in the next story.